Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. The Korean art scene has attracted a significant amount of attention from US and European art galleries over the past few years. More and more, we're seeing galleries opening satellite locations in cities such as Seoul, and the scene really cemented itself as a rising art market when the Frieze Art Fair brand chose to expand to Asia 3 years ago and selected Korea rather than, say, China. With the third edition of Frieze Seoul upcoming in a few weeks, we wanted to check in and get a sense for the Korean art market at the moment. So in this week's episode, we're joined by Andy St. Louis, a Seoul-based art critic and founder of Seoul Art Friend, an online platform dedicated to promoting contemporary Korean art. Andy is also the author of the brand new book, Future Present, Contemporary Korean Art, the first English language survey of contemporary Korean artists from the millennial generation. You can order it now on Amazon or wherever you get books. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Thanks so much for listening. Andy, it's great having you back on the podcast. How have you been?
Hey, Adam. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. The summer season is coming to a close shortly, and things are really going to ramp up for the art world just in a few weeks. We're excited to chat with you about a variety of things, including your new book, the scene in Korea. But I first want to get started asking you about Frieze Seoul, which opens in just a few weeks. This year will be the third edition of Frieze Seoul. I can't believe we're already on year number 3. Now that the fair is part of the annual art calendar in Seoul, how important has it become within the art scene there?
Yeah, since launching in 2022, Frieze Seoul has definitely become one of the most important international events held in Korea every year in any sort of industry. But early September has always been the high season for contemporary art here because the country's major biennial exhibitions that take place in Gwangju and Busan and Seoul, they always happen in September, as well as KIAF, which is the country's premier domestic art fair. And that's been running for more than 2 decades here in Seoul. September is the time of year when every art museum and gallery in Seoul really pulls out the stops, puts on their flashiest exhibitions, as well as all the major luxury brands are known to throw parties for the countless art collectors and celebrities that descend here in Seoul. There's really so much energy, so much excitement, and so much art to enjoy, making it really the annual highlight for all of us here in the Korean art world. As for this year, the Korean Ministry of Culture is actually getting involved, and they're organizing what is called the 2024 Korea Art Festival, but everybody else just refers to it as Seoul Art Week, as they've done for the past 2 years. Basically, this year, the government is investing some money to offer transportation packages via the country's high-speed rail network, which is going to help drive attendance to the Gwangju Biennale and the Busan Biennale, which take place in the southern part of the country. And then there are also promotions to make museum tickets more accessible, as well as some public events to stimulate more interest in contemporary art among local audiences. But, you know, the focus, of course, is on the art fairs, those being Frieze Seoul and KIAF. They both take place concurrently at the COEX Convention Center in the city's Gangnam district. And these fairs typically see in excess of 70,000 visitors over the course of just a few days, which is roughly on par with Art Basel Hong Kong. And to me, really quite remarkable considering this is just the third year that Frieze is being held here in Seoul. So it's really a great time for people to visit the city and not only see the art, but actually see, you know, everything that the city has to offer beyond contemporary art.
Wow, that's pretty remarkable, the level of attendance that they've already achieved in just a few years. So as we've discussed, will be the third year of the fair. I think usually an inaugural edition of a fair, there's a lot of experimentation, figuring out what works, what doesn't work, how you're engaging successfully with the local audience, areas of improvement. What aspects of the fair over the past 2 editions do you feel have been working really well? And are there any new aspects of the fair this upcoming year that you're excited about?
You know, as with any major international art fair, there is a whole slate of correlated programs that take place both at the fair and around the city. So the first of these is a video art screening program called Frieze Film, which they started in the very first year. It takes place again this year, but now it's expanded its program to include international media artists as well as Korean media artists. So that's very exciting. There's also the Frieze Seoul Artist Award, which was inaugurated last year. Korean sculptor named Goeun Choi is being selected to present a new large-scale commission at the fair. So there's a lot of sort of press promotion around this. It's a cash prize for the artist and really helps support emerging and mid-career artists. Last year, the prize winner was also Korean. I'm not sure if that's going to be a trend that continues into the future, but for the local art community, it's certainly exciting to really put one of our own up on this sort of platform. And the newest addition to the programming this year is a performance art program called Frieze Live, which will see 5 different performance pieces taking place both inside the fair as well as off-site. But if we're looking at the galleries at the fair itself, Frieze Seoul has done a very good job of maintaining a high level of quality again this year. More than 75% of all the exhibitors at Frieze Seoul this year also participated in both previous editions of the fair. And all the usual suspects will be here. So Gagosians, Werner, Hauser, Pace, Perotan, plus some interesting new faces. We have Belle Ami from Los Angeles, Kaio Koyuki from Tokyo, Proyectos Monclova from Mexico City, and Sultana from Paris. And then there's these 2 special gallery sectors, as with many big art fairs. Frieze Seoul has a Frieze Masters sector, sort of borrowing from the famous Frieze Masters fair that they do in London, concurrently with Frieze London. So this year at Frieze Masters Seoul, there are 19 galleries, and they'll be offering everything from 20th century conceptual art to old masters paintings to even some illuminated manuscripts. And then the second special sector is called Focus Asia. This sector has 10 galleries. They're up-and-coming art spaces from around the region that Frieze invites to present single artist presentations. So that's always a really interesting highlight of the fair. But if we zoom out and look at the fair sort of in its totality, we can see that the overall number of galleries has decreased slightly this year. So last year it was 121. This year it's 116. On its own, this decrease might not seem significant, but the number of Korean galleries has actually increased this year. So last year it was about 15% Korean galleries. This year it's 20% Korean galleries. And I think this may sort of reflect a waning of interest from some of the overseas galleries. I've also heard that several galleries actually pulled out of the fair after being accepted this year, which may account for the increased Korean gallery presence, since organizers may have had to offer, late invites to some local art spaces in order to fill those empty slots. And it bears mentioning here, once again, Frieze Seoul takes place during the same week as the Armory Show in New York. And I can't help but think that, double booking 2 of the international art world's biggest fairs, which take place on opposite sides of the planet, it just can't be good for business. And it's even more sort of bizarre considering that Frieze acquired the Armory Show last year, which means it's essentially competing against its own interests. And Adam, I know you're a New Yorker, and this scheduling conflict means you have to make, a difficult decision. I assume that you'll be back on the east side of Manhattan instead of in Gangnam this September, right?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that Frieze Seoul and the Armory occur at the same time. I would have loved to attend Frieze Seoul, but I will be in New York at the Armory. And I know many U.S. collectors would like to visit Frieze Seoul as well, but ultimately when the Armory is just so much more conveniently located for someone in the States, it's hard to not just simply attend that one. And I think one of the other important things to note is that being in New York during the Armory Week, it really isn't just about the Armory. It's also the reopening of the art scene in New York following the summer hiatus. And that week is really one of the most important time slots of the year for galleries to put on exhibitions. The summer's ending, everyone's excited. So you don't just have the Armory Fair, but you also have a number of really important exhibitions at galleries throughout the city during that time. And you'd be missing that if you were in Seoul. I was hoping when Frieze acquired the Armory that maybe there was some kind of master plan where there'd be some type of shift in the programming or a consolidation or just something that prevented this overlap and I could attend both of them. But unfortunately, we haven't seen that master plan reveal itself, if it is going to indeed. Now, from the perspective of someone here in the US, I think many have noticed that more and more galleries are expanding or investing in the Korean art scene in a variety of ways. Being there, which galleries would you identify as having done the best or have been the most effective in terms of establishing a real presence in the art community in Seoul?
Just to set the stage a bit first, it wasn't until 2016 that the first major Western gallery set up shop here in Seoul. That was Perotan, followed in 2017 by Pace and Lehman Mopen. Then in 2019, various small fires also launched here in Seoul. And then we went through the COVID pandemic, and it wasn't until after COVID that things really started to heat up here. And now we've had 8 more galleries establish outposts here in the Korean capital within the past 4 years. So we've added major players like Tadeusz Ropak, Gladstone, and Esther Schipper, who are presenting, serious exhibitions year-round, along with some good mid-tier galleries like Koenig and Perez projects, which has added even more depth to Seoul's vibrant contemporary art scene. Out of all the contenders, I would say that Pace has unquestionably made the largest investment in terms of real estate. Their gallery in Seoul encompasses 3 floors of exhibition space. It also has a tea house/cocktail bar. So it kind of goes without saying that the opening receptions at Pace are just on another level compared to what any other gallery here in Seoul can offer. But if we're looking at real community engagement and serious commitment to promoting Korean art, I think Lehman Mopen has to be at the top of the list. Not only do they have a long history of working with Korean artists, like Do Ho Seo, they've worked with for more than 20 years. Lee Bool, they've worked with for about 15 years. But the exhibition program that they're running here in Seoul seems to be very much tailored to the local audience, rather than sort of cycling through shows and artists that they're sending around through their various galleries around the world. The gallery is really showing relevant and important work here, and I think really contributing to the local discourse around contemporary art and the serious issues, of our times. Also, to boot, in the last 2 years, they've added 2 more Korean artists to their roster, which is really quite remarkable, in my opinion. As for the rest of the foreign galleries, efforts are being made here and there, some group shows, some outreach, but mostly, placing their international roster artists in museum exhibitions here and really promoting their own interests. A gallery is a business enterprise, and so they do have to look out for their own interests. But, I do think that galleries like Lehman Mopen have really set a high standard for what these international galleries can and really ought to do with their platform here in Seoul.
Well, thanks for sharing that recent history of the galleries that have effectively really made a presence for themselves in Korea. It's really interesting to hear. I also wanted to get your sense of the pulse of the art market in Seoul at this time. Within the US, Europe, I think overall there's been some softening in the art market, in particular for some younger artists, maybe some more speculative artists, or artists whose prices have really climbed in the primary market, but maybe there haven't been any secondary activity to really justify that. How are things in the Korean art market? Are collectors still actively collecting? Have you seen any kind of slowdown there?
I would say the mood here is similar to the mood all over the world. Sales are slow, continuing this trend that started last year. And of course, everyone is really hoping that things will start to turn around, and we have some glimmers of hope here and there. But there's not too much evidence to show for it here in Korea. I think what we saw at Art Basel in June will also hold true at Frieze Seoul this year, which is, galleries being much more conservative in terms of their pricing and not really rolling out these extremely high value works, which pose a high level of risk for them in terms of going unsold. In terms of collector sort of mood, the key indicators that we have to go on here are some of the other Korean art fairs that took place earlier this year. So in May, the fair called Art Busan, which is sort of the country's second top fair, that fair did quite poorly. A number of major international galleries were notably absent, and sales of high value works were very few and far between. It seems like collectors in Korea are more interested in acquiring works by younger artists at more moderate prices and starting to place less focus on buying for investment purposes or purely investment purposes. Of course, there are countless other fairs that take place throughout the year in Korea, but none of them really attract the same caliber of foreign galleries as Frieze Seoul and, to a lesser extent, Kiev. One notable exception this year is a new fair called Art ONO. It's a boutique art fair that launched in April with around 36 galleries, so a very manageable size. And there were some big players, Esther Schipper, Chantal Cruzel, Marianne Ibrahim, Pearl Lam were all there. But reports coming out of the first edition of this fair were fairly mixed, and galleries seemed to adopt similar strategies to what was seen at Art Busan, and really tried to appeal to art collectors looking to acquire works by younger artists who have high growth potential, but whose prices now are relatively affordable.
So I do also want to get to your new book, Future Present, Contemporary Korean Art, which is available for sale now on Amazon, wherever one gets their books. Tell us a little bit more about your new book and really what motivated you to write it at this time.
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's a survey of 25 Korean artists from the millennial generation, which I think is really the most compelling segment of the Korean art world today. They're working across all mediums: painting, sculpture, installation, video, even some photography in there. And the title Future Present is meant to really reflect how these artists are continuing to evolve, not just as key figures of their own generation, but as leaders of the art scene in Korea, onward into the future. The project is really sort of a culmination of the 10 years that I've spent embedded here in the Korean art scene, watching these artists develop and really differentiate themselves from previous generations. I'm a millennial myself, and I really felt that my peer group wasn't receiving the attention that they really deserve from the international art world. And as an art critic, I started thinking about ways that I could meaningfully contribute to the discourse around these artists. And for me, publishing a book seemed like the best way to stimulate interest in their art practices, and really the best platform for me to introduce them to the international audience. Each artist in the book is presented across 8 pages, along with a critical text that introduces their practice. And the book also includes 2 newly commissioned essays that discuss the social, economic, and cultural contexts that are really relevant to their lived experience growing up in the 90s and 2000s here in Korea. It's a framework that I really think helps establish the book's premise regarding a sort of generational identity among these artists. And that identity is really tied a lot to economic uncertainty, digital media, of course, and cultural hybridity, which is not necessarily unique to Korea. I think this applies more broadly to millennials around the world, but certainly it sets them apart, and their attitudes and approaches to representing, the reality that they face. And so hopefully the book does a good job of getting this point across, and really, sharing a lot of images to introduce their practices to a much bigger audience than they currently have.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously the art market in Korea has garnered a lot of attention recently from galleries around the world, evidenced by the expansion of satellite locations there. And of course, we've been discussing the success of Frieze Seoul, but you just mentioned that Korean-based contemporary artists aren't receiving equally as much attention from the global art market. Is that a fair characterization? And if that is, why do you think that is occurring?
Yeah. I have to say, older generations of Korean artists have been getting plenty of attention recently, especially in the US. There was a major survey of 20th century Korean art at LACMA in 2022, 2023. And there was a huge traveling exhibition of experimental Korean art at the Guggenheim in 2023 that went to the Hammer Museum in 2024. Even the Met has started to ramp up its exhibition programming of Korean art in the past year. So, I think audiences are definitely becoming better acquainted with Korean artists, particularly American audiences. But, they've been primarily focused on these older generations. So I think a lot of people are familiar with names like Liu Fan, Park Seo-bo, maybe Yoon Hyung-gun. These are artists who were born in the 30s and 40s, and they pioneered the Korean monochrome movement, which is called dansekwa. Then you have boomer generation artists like Kim Soo-ja, Lee Bul, Do Ho-seo, Lee Bae, and even Gen X artists like Hae Gyu-yang and Minuk Lim and Jun Juno and Moon Kyung-won. So, I think people are familiar with some of these names, but in terms of artists, under the age of 45, there's not a lot of awareness. Millennial artists have had real difficulties in gaining this recognition outside of Korea. There are a few exceptions, people like Suki Seogyung Kang, Ah Young Kim, Hee Chun Kim, and Kang Seung Lee, who are all in my book, of course. But, this segment of the Korean art world is still very underrepresented at international commercial galleries, but also, in major institutional shows and biennial exhibitions, particularly outside of Asia. I think a big part of this is the language barrier, but not just for the artists themselves, also for the curators and the critics, because Korea has a robust art ecosystem with lots of art universities, art magazines. There's a huge amount of interest in contemporary art here in Korea. Plenty of art criticism, plenty of discourse around contemporary Korean art, but it's only happening in Korean for a Korean audience. And there's really only a handful of people who are writing about Korean art in English. In putting this book together, I realized that from a publisher's standpoint, there's much more of a market for art historical writing about Korean art than contemporary content or contemporary criticism. I managed to find a publisher at Skira, which is based in Milan, who was really willing to partner with me on this project. But a lot of publishers are really skeptical about whether there's a market for this type of book, which for me is really, really puzzling because, as as everyone knows, there's so much global interest in almost every other aspect of Korean culture. Film, television, music, like K-pop, of course, food, fashion. I mean, Korean culture is really has been dominating the global sort of consciousness for a number of years now, but contemporary art is somehow just left out of this conversation. I think one part of this is that Korea doesn't have like a huge superstar artist who can be the face of the Korean art world. There's no Takashi Murakami or Yayoi Kusama like Japan had, and there's no Ai Weiwei or Cao Fei like China had. There's no single personality that can sort of attract this global attention. So, for me, as far as I can see, in order to really push the needle forward and get more eyes on the millennial generation of Korean artists, I think the first step is just getting more information out there and providing more ways for people to encounter the incredible work being created in Korea right now. So, I hope this book will serve as an important resource for scholars and educators and students looking to learn more about this important part of the contemporary art world and really inform future research into what I see is a very pivotal period in Korean art history and the Korean market, as well as we're seeing with Frieze Seoul and the way that the market is beginning to respond to Korean contemporary art, more broadly.
Well, I think that point really proves that your book really is important in terms of bringing more attention to these Korean contemporary artists. Andy, thanks so much again for coming onto the podcast and helping us preview this upcoming edition of Frieze Seoul, as well as providing your perspective on the latest happenings in the Korean art market. And if our listeners don't already, they should definitely check out your online platform, Seoul Art Friend, as well as get your new book, which is available on Amazon or wherever you get new books. It's called Future Present Contemporary Korean Art. Andy, thanks so much again. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it.